Welcome to another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous, coming to you 6 days a week as we interview whitetail experts and hear their traditions and personal stories of the hunt. Learn more about the latest gear, discover proven tips, and the latest strategies so you can make your next hunt a success. Now, here's your host, Bruce Hutchin.
This is Whitetail Rendezvous, episode number 189.
Today we're joined by Todd Pringnitz, president of Wicked Tree Gear. He grew up in Michigan but now lives in Iowa, and he has built some bomb-proof, fastest-cutting, longest-lasting tree trimming gear that you can get. If you want to hinge trees, if you want to cut out shooting lanes, he has the gear for you. And more than that, he's got a technique called run and gun that you're not going to want to miss. Hey, listeners, don't forget to text 33444 Food Plot for your free Food Plot ebook.
Welcome to another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous. This is your host, Bruce Hutchin. And today we're heading to Iowa and we're going to connect with Todd Pringnitz. He's the CEO, founder of Wicked Tree Gear. Todd, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Bruce. I'm happy to be here, buddy.
Hey, you got a pretty nice deer on your bio photo. Tell me about that.
Did I send you the rusty nail buck with all the sheds laying in front of him?
Yes, sir. That is Mr. Rusty Nail.
That is the rusty nail. Well, he was a buck that probably I will never duplicate from the meaning standpoint. When I first bought my farm here in Iowa, he was a 3-year-old deer, and it showed up on every hunt we went on. We got tons of footage of him, and I went on to find his sheds that year, and it kind of set a precedence where I wanted to see what he would turn into because there was a beautiful 10-pointer, probably like a 140 class as a 3-year-old. And as the years went by, I eventually had an opportunity to pass him as a 4-year-old and hoping that he would get to that 5, 6, 7-year-old age class. And he went underground for a couple of years. I was never able to get caught back up to him. And then finally, when he was 8 years old, I literally snuck right into his bedroom with my tree stand on my back, set up right underneath his nose, and ended up getting a crack at him 14 minutes later, and was very fortunate enough to get it all on video. So that buck is my dream come true. It's a Boone and Crockett caliber 8-year-old whitetail that had been hunted by a lot of different guys down in my area, and I was just so fortunate to get a crack at him. And I don't know if I'll ever kill another deer if that means that much.
Wow, it's just gorgeous. And folks, when the show posts, that'll be the the signpost, the hallmark, the display for the show, and it's just a gorgeous buck. And you mentioned something really critical. You saw him all up to 4.5 years old, then he disappeared for 2 years.
Yeah.
Now, if you do some reading, and I would say Google it, QDMA has some work on that, and I've read a lot of works on it, that there's something that happens to mature bucks between that 4.5 to 8.5, that they literally just disappear. And some people think it's because they're in a prime breeding mode, and they know how important they are to the local herd, their herd within the 1.5 miles of where they live. And take a look at that. I'd be interested in another show with you after you take a look at that information and spend some time on that, because you did something that you took this deer from 3.5 past him and then took him all the way to basically the end of his reign. He's going to be going downhill, even if he's got good food and nutrition. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, what I really did find out through all the shed hunting and footage and different years of hunting the rusty nail, he really never went anywhere, and that is true in more senses than one. He was here the whole time. I found his sheds in the same areas that I expected him to be living in. Followed his sign even during shed season because I knew his rough core areas, which is one during the late season just before shed season. But what I've really learned is that as they get older, their travel corridors, their area of roaming, so to speak, get smaller and smaller, and they just go nowhere. They lay on their big fat bellies. They get up a couple times throughout the day to stretch, browse, and they just wait till dark before they move. And that's how they've reached the age that they have. I also believe a lot of these big mature deer like Rusty Nail, as an 8-year-old, he was the dominant deer in the area, and that the sign in his bedding area just showed the frustration and the dominance that he had. that was his home range. That was his bedroom. And I truly believe that the alpha dominant does in the area literally will seek these alpha bucks out, and they know who they want to be bred by. They want to be bred by the strongest animal in the herd. And I think that the older the does get, that they probably instinctually will breed in that way. I think younger deer just get, I'm not a deer breeding or research professional by any means, but it sure seems that way. Those big ones just don't move at all during the rut. And I truly believe because they have enough does to breed right in their core area, they just don't need to.
How big was his home range? Not his core range, but how big was his home range during those couple of years?
He had a pretty big home range that I would probably say was about a mile in diameter, plus or minus. And during the season, he would move from the big farm fields in the summer into the thicker and thicker timber as the season progressed and I got closer and closer to the rut. And part of that I know has to do with hunting pressure because this whole area gets hunted pretty hard. But earlier in the year, the same year I killed him, I was on him right at the beginning of October. I missed him by 15 minutes of the trail camera one evening, and then I hunted him straight for 5 days and literally blew him out of the area. I hunted him so hard. But in years past, he just became a ghost. So my rule of thumb is if I know where a whitetail buck is at any particular time of the year, whether it's October 1st or January 1st, I will not hesitate. I go right after him. You just only have so many opportunities with these deer. You don't know where they're going to be tomorrow. And sure enough, I actually moved them almost a mile to a particular knob in a section of timber, and that's where I ended up killing him. But just from all that pressure on that field, I never got another trail cam picture of him from that day on, and he literally moved. But it was also the time of year that he would be doing that as they start taking the crops out down here that will generally push your deer back into the timber a little bit further. But amazingly, I think these big deer survive because their personalities they're more of a reclusive animal, the ones that make it to this maturity. If they had a real hyperactive personality and were really, really dominant, and they get careless. And around here with all the hunting pressure, those animals get killed at 3 years old, 4 years old, so on and so forth. So I think to reach that trophy caliber size and just that age, it has to be a combination of several things, but it's the smart ones that make it. Otherwise, they would have been killed last year. You know what I mean? Yeah,
and that's just great insight. And I just think I live out in Colorado, and I've hunted elk throughout the Rocky Mountain region, and I hunted with some guys in New Mexico one year, and this guy was unbelievable. Once he got on to a big bull, I mean, a really mature herd bull, he would just pound that until the bull left his, ranch or the mountain, and the bull either left or he killed it. That was pretty much it. And he was so aggressive. I mean, we've been up close and personal to some very big bulls, and he just keeps saying, nope, that isn't the one we want. And we'd spin out and we'd go find. And he was relentless. And that sounds like the way you are. But folks, everybody can't do that. One, you have to control the land that you're on. Todd, how big's your farm?
My personal farm that I own is 63 acres, so it's not huge by any standpoint or stretch of the imagination. But I've been able to secure neighboring properties exclusively in a variety of different ways because I live here, know the neighbors, and it has been something that I've worked on in these relationships for years and years and years. But in a lot of cases, there's still landowners that hunt that I have to hunt around. And what I've had to become an expert of is knowing where my neighbors hunt, what stands they hunt in, and usually these are the regular weekend warrior hunters, and so they hunt in the same stand year after year after year, and they are not very cautious about their access points and scent and things like this. So I actually use that data to dictate where I believe a buck is going to move around my neighbors' farms because the big ones, they know. And if you wouldn't believe it, Rusty Nail, where I ended up killing that deer, he was within 100 yards of one of my neighbor's stands. And that is part of the reason why I had never gone into that area was because I've just always avoided it. Well, what I didn't realize is that from the spot he had bedded and chose to call home, he could monitor both my access and my farm when I came and went. and he could also monitor my neighbors. And a lot of my neighbors, they love to do calls. They rattle, they grunt, they do the deer cam calls, and these big bucks, they just know the difference. So he could just sit there, listen to what guys were hunting, and know he ain't going to go that direction anytime soon. So learning how to anticipate, what they might do to try to get around those situations, that's how I ended up getting them, basically.
So, folks, you heard a couple of really great tips. One, know your neighbors, build a relationship. So Todd took his 63 acres. What's your total amount of acreage that you can hunt?
I hunt around 350, 400 acres now. And when I say that, about half of it's tillable, so it's open farm fields or whatever. But half of my secret has been able to access my stands from multiple directions. A lot of times we're forced, if we have, let's say, one 63-acre piece or an 80-acre piece, depending on, how the property lays, you might only have access to that farm from one direction, let's say from a road. The deer know that. That's how they've been hunted on that farm their whole lives. And if they're still alive, they must have anticipated or known something about how you were getting in or out, or they just have a core area that they just don't leave. But that's one of the big things I have an advantage of, is because I have permission from several of my neighbors. I'm able to access from multiple directions into the same spot, whether it's a morning hunt or an evening hunt, and I put the time in to really focus on, if I was a big buck and I was bedding here, how would I be bedding? What would I be looking at? What would I be able to catch, try to sneak in behind me? And you've got to find the flaw in their plan and be able to manipulate it.
I'm taking a lot of notes. You're giving us some good stuff. Listen, if you're not taking notes, Todd's got game. He knows how to get her done, but he also is analytical. By that, I mean he could look at a Google Earth map of his 400, 600 acres that he's hunting, knowing that half is tillable. So he's got pinpoints, he's got funnels, he's got certain terrain breaks, he's got edges, and then he's got some really gnarly bedding areas. All those things rolled up. He is a student of his land, and two, and he said it, deer know when you close your door that you're going to hunt X stand. They just know it. And if you don't believe it, listen to Todd. Todd, your thoughts?
Oh, absolutely. A few years ago, I had been hunting in Iowa. I've been living here now for about 11 years, and I moved from Michigan, which is a really high-pressure hunting area. We just didn't even have mature deer up there. When I first started hunting down here, it was definitely easier hunting. There was less bow hunters, there was less pressure, and you could just go out, set in a pinch point or a funnel, and see mature deer and get opportunities at them. And we passed all sorts of big deer because we had some larger caliber animals to hunt. Since then, the hunting has gone down a little bit, but mostly I've started to pinpoint individual whitetails and go after one animal or two animals each season. And you really have to change your mindset when you're hunting an individual animal from going to those typical spots that we all as hunters have been trained to go to. Pinch point, funnels, inside corners of field edges, on field edges themselves. You have to approach it as though you are going to do something no other hunter has ever done before in that area. And that way of thinking about things differently sometimes means setting up in trees that you would never imagine in a million years you could ever even hunt from. You have to be willing and able and be adaptable to any situation at any time, and realize that hunting a big mature deer, everyone is different, every situation is different. There's no cookie cutter approach where this buck you're going to kill the same way year after year after year. I'll tell you, they always seem to have something up their sleeve, and it's usually the crazy sets where you're like, I'm either going to kill one or I'm going to get busted. It's the odd spots, the things that normally no one would ever think of. Those are the types of tactics that can kill huge mature deer, because you're the first one to ever try it. They've never had somebody come in from that direction. They've never had somebody set up in that stupid tree or even on the ground. I mean, you gotta make it happen. You gotta find a way.
And there are ways. And if you go back, listeners, and listen to some of the shows, the guys that have put mature bucks on the ground, they did something different than any other person in their neighborhood was doing, their neighbors or whatever. I can't emphasize this enough. Think differently, but think like a deer.
Absolutely. And, we're all products of this industry. Bruce, yourself, I think you said in our pre-interview, you've been hunting since 1966. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So you've seen, read, and talked to a lot of hunters about a lot of the same kinds of things, hunting funnels, hunting the wind, hunting, these different things that are just common topics that come up in hunting. And even from where the target on your archery target is, these things train us over time. And it really took myself hunting with some really experienced big buck hunters years ago that completely flipped my whole mindset about hunting mature animals, because I was a product of the industry of watching the television shows and believing a lot of the hype around certain tactics and products, and hunting around these big buck killers who had no financial ties to any companies, and it wasn't what they were getting paid, or they were do-it-yourselfers and killed the biggest whitetails in their areas consistently. And I started to look at how they approached it, and it was completely different than anything I'd ever heard of. But mostly it was just being extremely aggressive and not being afraid to move in on a big buck, where a lot of guys are just so cautious, and they miss their small window of opportunity.
I think at the farm that we hunt, Eddie's farm, and we've been hunting the same 1,000 acres, but it's a big family. The family's grown from about 5 to 10 people that hunt. We got cousins and nephews. I mean, there's a lot of pressure on this. I can't tell you how many tree stands are on the farm now. And Eddie killed the biggest buck. He killed, and we'll mention the score, Boone and Crockett score this, 173 buck, and he killed it as it was bedded in an old junkyard, just gnarly, just bushes, and that's exactly, the reason I bring it up, that's exactly where you wouldn't think a buck would be laying, but he was smart. He knew the people were in the field. Eddie was there, and he shot during rifle season. He shot it, and it wasn't even 5 acres. I know the spot. It was just, are you kidding me? That's where you dumped that buck? He goes, yep. I saw his tine. That's how I saw him. He saw his tine sticking up, and he was observant. It was his place. It was something out of place. Now, listeners, listen to that. There was something out of place that didn't belong. Guess what? Deer do exactly the same thing we do. There's something new in this spot. Is it a blind? Is it a cut? Is it firing lanes or shooting lanes? And they know. And you're listening to Todd, and this guy knows some stuff, folks. So, Todd, your comments on what I just said?
Yeah, I think a lot of guys are, kind of grew up hunting the way I did, where, maybe they didn't have a really good hunter that they hunted with, and it was more a tradition, camaraderie, deer camp, fun. And I've always been I want to figure out, it was just as much of a challenge just to figure a buck out, let alone to get a crack at him. So for me, I think that a lot of hunters can start by looking at a new property and saying, where has no one ever hunted before? And start there. Don't go to the inside corner. Don't go to that funnel. Yeah, that's great to have tree stands there, but if you see tree stands or evidence that other hunters have been there, you can pretty much guarantee that every mature deer in the area will avoid that spot during daylight. And I mean, it's almost ridiculous how much these animals live with their noses. But that's the big thing, is you absolutely have to strip yourself back and say, what has no one ever done on this property? Start there and work in reverse. And I think you'll be surprised at what you might see in those stupid spots that no one else has thought to hunt. The other thing I will say, a tactic that I learned many, many years ago, and it has led to the demise of not only the rusty nail buck, but a whole bunch of the deer on my wall. And we call it running and gunning, but essentially we throw our lone wolf tree stand on our back, grab our wicked saw, and go into an area, set up, and hunt right then. And I literally will save entire sections of this farmland that I hunt. I'll shed hunt through these areas, identify spots that, if I haven't gotten a crack at this buck by a certain date or mid-season, and I'm going to get aggressive, this is an area I'm going to come run and gun into, but I'll wait to set anything up. I won't trim anything. I won't hang a tree stand, because then you're giving them a clue to your existence there, that you've been there and that you're going to be back. I prefer to keep a feather in my cap. I always want to have a rainy day spot where I can sneak into a spot that has not been hunted all year long, set up, and have the first crack at any animal that's in there. And more times than not, that that approach, by going in at that moment, you are able to set up on the sign that is existing in that spot right then. Not what was existing last year, not what might be existing next year. You're setting up based on what those animals are doing in that area right there that day, and you can use whatever exact wind conditions are happening at that moment to pick a tree. I honestly don't even consider cover that much when I do a run and gun, because you've got the surprise. You've got them fooled. If you can sneak in and get set up quietly, you will be able to get away with murder, just because there's been no human scent, no intrusion, no evidence in that area before.
So are you using a climber then?
I use hang-ons. I used to use climbers quite a bit. Now that we film, and in Iowa here where I hunt, we just do not have very many good trees. And generally, the super straight trees are not the ones that are going to offer you good cover. And cover is very important, because for us filming, and I self-film a lot as well, I have to have cover in order to conceal some of my movements. I got to move a camera around and all that stuff before I can get a crack at one. And that is the primary focus of my hunts, are to document first, to kill second. You hope to do both in the same time, but we really, really do have a lot of passion behind our filming and telling of these stories. So we want to capture it all on video, but cover is very important, and I'd rather set up lower off the ground in a tree that offers better cover than be 25, 30 feet up in a perfectly straight oak or something, because you've got very limited cover once you get up above, and mostly that's where everybody else hunts. I don't want to hunt where everybody else hunts. I want to hunt in a spot on a tree that most hunters would never think of, because a whitetail will never suspect it.
You mentioned wicked tree saws. Now, how does that relate to Todd?
Well, I actually, my whole life has basically revolved around whitetails, and in my professional life, I grew up in Michigan and started out as a draftsman working for a design house, worked my way into manufacturing, and eventually started doing product design and really getting into designing and developing products specifically for hunting companies. Many years ago, I started working with Lone Wolf tree stands, and I was doing some work for them on the design and supply end. Slowly but surely started designing and developing these different companies products for them, but primarily to solve problems in my own world of hunting. Meaning, if I went out hunting and I needed something to work better or function better, I'd either build my own or help other companies do that, to basically just solve some of these problems in the field. One of which had always been breaking the cheap plastic hand saws and the cheap pole saws that were what was available at the time. And for years and years and years, it was something that just never went away. No one solved the problem. No one created a good quality saw that wouldn't fail. And eventually, at one point, I took it upon myself to solve that problem. Wicked Tree Gear was born, and 6 years later, we have 15 different types of saws and pole saws and a variety of different professional-grade trimming equipment that is all built bomb-proof. It's made to not break. It has a lifetime warranty, and it's meant for serious use by serious hunters, landscape professionals, arborists, but mostly it was to solve the problem of breaking hand saws, which I'm sure if anybody out there who's listening who uses folding saws, you've been through the same thing we all have. And so we designed a wicked tough hand saw, which is an all-metal cast aluminum handle design. All metal parts, there's no plastic to worry about breaking, and it just solves a huge problem for all hunters and outdoorsmen alike who use folding saws regularly. It is built for abuse.
How do I connect with you?
You can get a hold of me through Facebook. We have two different pages on Facebook. One is for Wicked Tree Gear. The other is for White Knuckle Productions, which is our web show, and we also sell DVDs as well. We also can be contacted through our websites, either whiteknuckleproductions.com or wickedtreegear.com.
No Twitter, Instagram?
We do have Instagram and Twitter accounts. I'm just not the techie side, so I don't know exactly how to reach through those.
We'll find out.
You bet.
There's a lot of smart people in social network listening to the show, so they'll figure it out.
There you go.
So let's go back to your running and gunning. Now you got the right gear, you got to hang on, you get the tree trimming. How much trimming do you do for firing lanes? I mean, you're setting up, you're running and gunning, so you're in there the day before, or the morning of, doing this in the dark? Explain to me how running and gunning works.
Usually, I will wait for windy days, and windy days particularly, hopefully, where a rain has happened in a particular time, at least if we're going into timber. And if I'm alone, it's half the noise than when I have a camera guy, and I hunt sometimes with a camera guy at different times of the year. So, but generally, I'll wait for a windy day. I'll have an area in my mind where I already have been in there before. But trust me, this works just as good on new areas that you've never been in. The whole key to the run and gun setup is to be able to put all your equipment on your back, carry your bow and your saw, walk in the woods, set up and hunt right then. You're not leaving the woods, going back to your camp, taking a shower, getting your lunch. You're going out hunting, and you're hunting at that moment. And the reason why it's so effective is because you've not given them advance warning that you're going to be in there. If you go in and set a stand and then leave, that buck's coming through there at some point in the next 24 hours if you're going to kill him, because he's going to be living in that area. He's going to hit your ground scent where you'd been in, and you will never see him. By setting up right at that spot, the first time he comes through, he's all of a sudden going to have an arrow let the wind out of his lungs, and he will not know what just happened. And hopefully, at the end of the blood trail, there's the deer that you set up on. But in order to see some of these big deer, you've got to get into their core areas where they feel safe. And when you get into that area, you'll know it because he'll have it shredded.
Repeat that, please. With the last thing, because they'll have it shredded. What does that mean?
Usually, these big deer, when you're hunting on the alpha buck in an area, his core area will be completely torn up with buck sign. He'll have big rubs, he'll have scrapes, and usually these are the areas that provide them with the most wind control. It's basically an area that puts all the wind in their favor. We've all been out in timbers where we come up, let's say, on a ravine, and all of a sudden the wind will switch in your face and it will blow, let's say, opposite of the prevailing wind. Well, what happens is that topography creates a swirl. It creates an area where either the wind eddies or it just has a tendency to switch back and forth. These are the areas where big bucks will hang out because they can just stand there, sniff in breath after breath through their nose, and they know what's all around them. They can smell what's up on the ribs. They can smell what's down on the bottom. It is like a mixing bowl of scent. And sure enough, in those areas where the wind is just almost impossible to hunt, that's where that buck will be, and that's where a sign's going to be. So when I go into an area for the first time, running and gunning, I'm looking for this sign in advance as I'm walking in. And usually I'll have some sort of an indication of either by looking at an aerial photograph, a topographical map, or previously being in the area physically, the previous season or whatever. I'll kind of have a good idea where I'm going, but boy, I just don't want to step anywhere. I can imagine a big buck coming through, and at the same time, I don't want to set up outside of where I need to be. I want to be right in this core. And with a bow, you got to get close, man. 20, 30 yards. You got to be in there tight.
What about cover scent? Okay, you're running, gunning. You're gonna walk through core areas. Going to be closed. Going to be brushy. I don't think they're going to be like an open park.
No, generally it's the nasty thick areas, and I'll literally use my bow in one hand and my pole saw in the other to just move brush quietly out of the way. We have a lot of honeysuckle in our area, but I will take my time. I'm not worried about ground noise so much. I'm not worried about stepping on branches and making too much ground noise or natural woods noises. If you've ever heard a squirrel in the timber, you know what I mean. The noises that are going to kill you are metallic. If you make one metallic ting, it's over. They can hear that noise for hundreds of yards through the timber, and it would be the equivalent of your wife screaming that somebody has broken in your house at night. I mean, that's how obnoxious it is to a whitetail, because that means certain death to them. You have to take it that seriously. So I've got cloth tape and foam tape on all my equipment just to eliminate any possibility of noise, because, boy, you can spend 15, 20, 30 minutes being real quiet in a setup, and boy, if you accidentally ting your bow on a step or ting your hook on your camera arm, it literally, you just ruin your hunt, because if a buck is bedded within hearing range, he's not going to jump up and run away. He's just going to lay there. He won't get up. You'll never see him. He'll know you're there, and that's not what you want. So I would say, if anything, the run and gun, you just want to plan on giving yourself some extra time, and over a period of time of doing it over and over, you get better and better. I think, personally, lone wolf tree stands is like the only way we can do what we do. Between the cast platforms and the climbing sticks, you can get set up on a tree in about 10 minutes, completely dead quiet without making any metallic noise. And that's half the ticket. You got to use good equipment if you're going to expect good results. And I'm not saying that you have to have, a premium tree stand to go kill a deer, but for this type of a hunt, you're going to need some good equipment in order to be quiet, in order to actually be able to sneak the equipment in for weight purposes. And I wouldn't recommend buying a hang-on tree stand with a chain, for example.
I just looked back. Adam Lewis of Sound Barrier, episode number 168, has a whole system that he's developed, and pretty smart guy. He's a physics teacher, and he figured it out that the hertz that deer hear. And he said, Bruce, when you shut your truck's door metallic, he said, if it's a calm morning, no wind, that deer can hear it from a quarter mile away. So even for you, Todd, check out Whitetail Rendezvous episode 168, and Adam Lewis, heck of a guy. He's got some stuff going on. And I just throw that out, listeners, because that dovetails just what Todd just said. And again, you got to be a student of what we're doing here. You just got to be a student and understand the adversary that you're against with a mature deer. No question about it.
And that's the number one thing I want everybody to realize is that I've been very fortunate to hunt in Iowa. I've killed a lot of really nice deer. I only bow hunt. I do everything myself. And every year I feel schooled by the end of the season because I'll tell you, they always have the upper hand. And if there's ever a time where killing a mature deer with a bow and arrow on video ever becomes easy, I just want to know that person. It's challenging. I have 2 or 3 bucks I was hunting this late season, and I couldn't figure them out. I mean, sometimes they are just tricky, and I have the same, no matter how much property you have, they're always living just off where you have access. I mean, it's just inevitable. That's how hunting is. You're never going to be able to own it all unless you're way more fortunate than I am. But that's kind of part of the challenge for me. I love to be able to know that there's a dozen guys bow hunting within a mile of my house, and I'm the guy who got a crack at that 8-year-old or that 7-year-old last year or whatever. It is such a crazy good feeling to know that you did something that the other hunters weren't able to do. And that's not ego. That's just figuring it out and just getting lucky, being in the right spot at the right time that one day. But generally, it's because you made it happen.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of part 1 of Todd Pringnitz, owner of Wicked Tree Gear, and I'm going to have the second episode will be on tomorrow. Next segment of this, we're going to talk more about Wicked Tree Gear, hunting mature whitetails that we just spent over 30 minutes doing, and farming for whitetails. Thank you for being a guest on Whitetail Rendezvous.
Oh, thank you very much, Bruce. I enjoy talking anything about whitetails, and it's always great to talk with someone who has a lot more experience than myself.
On tomorrow's show, you're going to hear from Todd Pringnitz, part 2 of Wicked Tree Gear, Running and Gunning, and Secrets on Mature Bucks.
Thanks for joining us. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous, where you can listen and learn from the experts so you can be more successful on your next hunt. Until next time, listen, learn, and succeed.
Remember to text 33444 Food Plot for your free ebook